Okay, so welcome and thank you for joining us today at the Collaborative Digital Research Space for what I'm sure will be a lively panel discussion with past recipients of the UTM JHI Annual Seminar Award. My name is Tia Sager and I'm the Senior Research Associate here at CDRS, and it is my pleasure to welcome our 5 panelists, Professors Ajay Rao, Elizabeth Wijaya, Jacob Gallagher-Ross, Martin Revermann, and our moderator, Dr. Kimberley Yates. So before we get started, I will just introduce Dr. Kimberley Yates, who is the Associate Director of the Jackman Humanities Institute, a staff appointment that she has held for 16 years since the inception of the JHI. She is a double graduate of the University of Toronto with a doctorate in English in 1977 and a master's in information studies in 2009. She has written and spoken about alternative academic careers in the humanities and is interested in a wide range of subjects, including medieval drama, puppets, Africa, digital humanities, and the future of the university. She oversees competitions and reporting at the JHI and has watched as the JHI UTM seminar has grown with each iteration. So over to you, Dr. Yates.
Thank you, Tia. Before we get started, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So our first panelist is Ajay Rao. He is Associate Professor in the Department of Historical Studies and Study of Religion. His areas of research include Sanskrit intellectual history, Sanskrit literature, and religion in South India. His first book, Refiguring the Ramayana as Literature, A History of Reception in Pre-Modern India, focused on traditional hermeneutics and the pre-colonial history of the modern emergence of this epic as a foundational religious text. He is currently engaged in collaborative research projects on the age of Vedanta and Sultanate Sanskrit. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Wijaya. She works at the intersection of cinema, philosophy, and area studies. She is especially interested in the material and symbolic entanglements between East Asia and Southeast Asia cinema. Her work emphasizes a multi-methodological approach, which is attentive to media forms, ethnographic detail, material realities, archival practices, international networks, and interdisciplinary modes of theorization. In 2021, she convened the Mediating Race, Reimagining Geopolitics seminar. She is building an online accessible collection of Asian short films with the UTM library. She is also the co-founder of E&W Films. She's an associate producer of Taste 2021, directed by Lei Bao, which received a special jury award of the Encounters competition at the 71st Berlinale Film Festival. Welcome. Jacob Gallagher-Ross is an associate professor and chair of the Department of English and Drama and a graduate faculty member at the Center for Drama, Theatre, and Performance Studies. He is the author of Theatres of the Everyday, 2018, a frequent contributor to theatre journals. His articles and essays have appeared in Theatre Survey, TDR, PAJ Theatre, Theatre Forum, Contemporary Theatre Review, and Canadian Theatre Review. His article, Mediating the Method, in 2015, won the American Theatre and Drama Society's 2016 Vera Mowry Roberts Award, recognizing the year's best article or book chapter. Welcome. And finally, Professor Martin Revermann is a classicist and theater studies scholar. His research interests are not confined to Greco-Roman antiquity, but cover the cultural history of theater, both Western and Asian, more broadly and until the 21st century. Specific areas include performance criticism of Greek drama, the cultural history of Greek theater from antiquity to the 21st century, the history and theater of translation, theater iconography, theater history, and theater sociology. Another major focus of his research is the work of Bertolt Brecht, especially exploring Brecht's position as playwright, director, and theorist within the history of theater as a whole. He is also working on the history of theater audiences and play-going. His research and graduate teaching therefore integrates classics, theater studies, comparative literature, German studies, and history. Very interdisciplinary. So welcome to all of our panelists this morning. I have 2 questions for each of you, and we'll sort of take it in a round twice. My first, I'm going to ask a series of logistical questions first, and then a few content-driven questions about the intellectual scope of your projects, Please feel free to offer advice to prospective seminar leaders as we go along. I'm thinking about what do they need to know as they prepare their applications and as they approach the experience of actually making this happen. What are the challenges? What are the rewards in doing this? It's a powerful and very flexible piece of research support, and it can be taken in many directions and executed in many ways. So I'll start with Elizabeth. In 2022 through 22, you led a two-part seminar called Mediating Race, Reimagining Politics in Spite of a Pandemic and a CAUT censure of the U of T. Can you tell us about the experience of making those events happen online, in person, and hybrid sometimes? What kinds of planning would you recommend for future conveners?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. So, yes, when I applied for the JHI UTM seminar, that was at the end of my first year at U of T, so it was relatively new. And I had applied just after things were shutting down because of the pandemic. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the air. But my primary motivation at that time was, oh my goodness, I just moved to Toronto. I barely know anyone. And I'm not going to be able to do my travel research. My conferences are cancelled. So I had this fear of like intellectual isolation. So at the time when I saw this, the call coming through my mailbox, I was like, I think I can do this because it's not just me. There are going to be other people at different ranks who might be really open to having all this conversation. So my plan at that time, I mean, at the time, no one knew how long this was going to last for. So my plan at that time was that the fall would definitely be online, and then we'll see what happens. So it is like you said, there was a lot of flexibility because then turned out the winter term, I was on maternity leave. And then for the fall, when at first I wanted to do something, so I was able to get an extension of the funds because of my maternity leave. But then after that, there was the censure. So I pushed back events again. But throughout, there was a lot of flexibility. And so for the first fall of 2020, I did 4 events, which was a lot, but I wanted to condense them in because of the leave. And at the time, there was a lot of enthusiasm. So I think so yesterday I did like an online event where I think the numbers are lower nowadays. But at the time, the highest attendance I had was about 174 people from across the world, Asia, North America, Europe. So generally, and this is a practical matter. So generally, I realized holding events at about 9 or 10 a.m. EST, depending on daylight savings, works really well if you want to be able to speak to Asia and Europe. So the event I had that had the highest attendance was an event on race in Singapore cinema. So for that, I partnered with a Singapore non-profit objectives to help with publicity, as well as have a series of online screenings that was relevant to the panel discussion that I wanted to have. So but I always had this sense that I didn't want it to be a fully online seminar. So we were planning eventually for our first in-person visit in Feb 2021, which just happened to be the moment when UTM sort of opened and then closed again. So then we had, so there's a lot of flexibility because then, and for the in-person visit component, I was able to budget in help from RAs that was really very important. So I think the RAs had worked so hard to do all the booking. At the time, there was so many forms you had to fill for an in-person event to be possible. But in the end, we still had to postpone it. But I didn't want to because the speakers were very motivated. So despite all the extension, the whole thing took actually 2.5 years. We actually, in the end, the list of speakers were pretty much almost the same as the original speakers that we intended to invite. And the last speaker came in just last semester. So we're able to have 2 in-person events, and the rest were sort of online, the online events. And yeah, I mean, I just wanted to emphasize what was really helpful was all the help. So for example, the UTM Research Office, like Drew helped with the posters, and it was really great. And in fall 2020, when I started running the events, I also started directing the Southeast Asian Seminar Series of the Asian Institute. So this meant that all the online events I had help from the Asian Institute to to run the logistics of registration and all those things. So I didn't have to be the one sort of like troubleshooting, and I didn't have to be the one that sort of like attendees were emailing. So I think for whoever is planning to apply for this, if you're thinking of online, in-person, hybrid, generally having something in the budget or some plans for help would really be very, very useful.
Thank you. That's a very complete answer. And congratulations on getting through this for 2.5 years and connecting with people all over the world. It's really an accomplishment. Okay, my next question is for Martin. In 1920, the one before Elizabeth's seminar, you were part of a 4-person team who were all from the Department of Historical Studies that led the UTM seminar dealing with fragmentary evidence from Greco-Roman antiquity. I want to think about the dynamics of shared leadership here. How did your leadership team divide responsibilities up, and would you recommend working with a team?
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit less about the historical genesis and more about kind of my what I learned from it and what I'd like to pass on. I'd like to want to distinguish between administrative leadership and intellectual leadership. Administrative leadership, I think you do need 1 or 2 people literally to take care of things like a budget and also to be as kind of contact persons for it. It was right to say one of the great things about UTM in particular is excellent support staff who really also, everyone is learning, and we knew by speaker 5 or 6, we knew exactly the routines and whatnot. So there needs to be administrative leadership of 1 or 2 people. And then more importantly, I think something I would call intellectual leadership. And I do think you need a core group of, I would say, minimum size 5 people, 5+ people who are completely intellectually committed to the project. And that means that they completely buy in, they go to the events, they give the whole thing kind of the minimum momentum actually needed. And that's basically my main message to everybody: be entrepreneurial, be academic entrepreneurs, and just take things into your own hands and make it happen. The second thing I would suggest is manage expectations. I think there is a certain, definitely with it, we were the classics group within historical studies. We're a small unit, right? And there's a deeply rooted sense that paper attended by 50 people is better than a paper attended by 5, and of course it's 10 times better. And this kind of thing. And I think it's very important to get rid of those metrics and just to see, an actual kind of core intellectual activity that I like having 50 people in the room too, but that cannot be the be all and end all of it. So I think that's very important, because I think people, again, as entrepreneurs, should not, some people may not apply because they are afraid of failing. And they have a very restricted view of what failure means, right? 7 people in the room means failure. It's not. We can, and my colleagues would attest to that. We've had wonderful discussions actually, often in smaller groups. So the sense of shared leadership, managing expectations. And last thing I would just like to say is that there is these things, and this seminar has now, for the classics group, grown into an annual seminar that we're doing, right? And so it's been some kind of an incubator. So I think that's another thing to think about in terms of kind of passing on the torch, and see this as nothing but a first step. But again, the core message I think needs to, I would like to pass on, is be entrepreneurial in this intellectual sense.
Thank you, and congratulations on continuing. I think that's more successful than, whether you have 5 or 50 people at a particular event.
Yes.
Okay, my next question is for Ajay. In 2018, 2019, you were the lead organizer of the UTM seminar titled Culture and Critique in South Asia, that brought together 6 additional faculty members and 3 staff members from a mix of disciplines. Everything about this one was large scale. It was so pre-pandemic. It was on a big scale kind of series. The scope of the inquiry was wide. There were many events, and there were many connections with public South Asian community organizations. What were the challenges and rewards of doing a seminar at this scale? And what advice would you like to share with applicants who have potentially big plans?
Well, I would say, first off, that I completely agree with Martin that there is a beauty to doing things that are at the right scale, and that doing things bigger is not always better. On the other hand, I like doing things that are big. And I think that if you can imagine the intervention that you would like to see through collaboration like this, that's what I would like to encourage people to dream about. Also, given the effects of the pandemic, yes, we're going to be different in terms of what we think of hybrid or online or in person. But I think that the opportunity is the same and perhaps even greater now to make a positive difference. That we're struggling for community and intellectual collaboration. So to get people out to UTM to discuss and work together is really profound. I would say in terms of thinking big, there are strategies. You have to be very mindful of every step of the way. The planning, you can't just create something and hope that people come. You have to actually plan it from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, first of all, starting with funding, if you think big, if you have a great idea at this university, you can get it funded. So you have to look at partners. You can work with the dean's office, with the OEPR. UTM has lots of resources if there's a good idea. So that would be one thing I would encourage. Then I would also encourage structuring the events in such a way that there's buy-in from the community. So, often we think of research as being very focused on a couple of scholars and graduate students, but actually, at UTM, we have so many undergraduate students who also are engaged in research. So I've always tied the events that we've done to undergraduate courses. Sometimes they're required for the courses, sometimes they're just extra credit. You bring even a few undergraduate, even if it's 2 or 3 undergraduate students, it really enhances the event. And then I would say, another thing I would say is to spend. Because I think that a lot of times people are, if they haven't done this before, spending money at the university is different than spending money in your household. You need to spend to do something, and the money is there to be spent. So spend on the kind of things that will make it comfortable for people. So for instance, transportation from downtown, nice food, make it really nice. I think it makes it a fun event. And then the other thing I would say is I really would discourage, for people again who haven't done a lot of activity at UTM, there might be a reluctance to have something that's solely focused at UTM, but I think that that's essential to not have shadow events downtown. So if you bring a speaker, international speaker, for them, this is the University of Toronto. It's not like there's a less of a prestige to be out at UTM. And so there's no need to do other events downtown, because of course, if you do that, then people will only attend the downtown event and not the UTM event. So those would be some of the main thing I would say is this is a fabulous opportunity. And if people are feeling maybe 50% that they're interested in doing it, they should just do it because it's great.
Mm-hmm. So it's $15,000, and you can absolutely build other kinds of funding into the project that you get this award for. The expectations are low and very flexible. There's really only 2 anticipated public events during the course of the year. The rest can be meetings with your group. And honestly, it is for UTM. This is the JHI's support of UTM. And so we want this to be something that benefits the UTM community and enriches people's research here. So my next question is for Jacob. You did the very first seminar in 1718. You were part of a team of 3 faculty members and 7 staff members who led the first ever UTM seminar, Digital and Mixed Reality Performance. So we have the benefit of time's passage. Looking back now, how has your work in that seminar grown into other kinds of pedagogical and research projects afterward? I'm looking at outcomes. What happened since?
I mean, there've been all kinds. I think seminar arrived at a really germinal time for me as a scholar, and I think for my co-organizers, Professor Larry Switsky and Professor Alex Gillespie, who is the department chair and is now, of course, principal of UTM. Personally, I was just finishing my first book. I'm starting to think about what the next project would be and how I wanted to approach it. And so the seminar actually became a way to try out different potential topics, to bring in potential collaborators, and really actually to seed that future work. And so just personally, a class and 2 book projects have come out of the work we did on the seminar. It arrived as I was planning a course called Digital Dramaturgies, which is really about new forms of theater that have been created in dialogue with new technologies. And so I taught that class for the first time in 2018, 2019, incorporating work by a lot of artists and scholars who visited us during the seminar the previous year. And I've taught it since once during the pandemic, which of course added a whole other layer to the investigation of these topics. And I can talk a little bit more about that. And then I'll be offering it again next year.
Fantastic.
So it's become a fixture in our curriculum. Research-wise, I have 2 books that are in progress that have come out of the work we did in the seminar. One is a collaborative book with the Intermediate Performance Ensemble Big Art Group, which is a survey of their last 20 years of work.
Neat.
They came to TM during the seminar to talk about their performance strategies and what they call crypto presence, which was actually, this anticipates your second question a little bit, Kim, but this was their attempt to create performance algorithmically. So before ChatGPT, they were making performances out of machine-generated text, which is very prescient. And then the other book that I'm working on is about a genre that I'm calling interface theater, which is theater that attempts to stage our relationships with technology, with computing platforms, with mobile interfaces, and to develop a critical relationship with it by using the conventions of theater to comment on the conventions of those technologies.
I know that the theater program here is very strong, so this was a chance for you to kind of leverage into where your students were and where the facilities are.
Absolutely, and so the pedagogical piece, so Larry Switsky, our co-organizer, is very interested in game studies. He's been a leader in bringing game studies to UTM and to the U of T, and also in intersections between gaming and performance. And so the seminar, I think, helped to clarify some thinking and some pedagogical ideas that have just, and this is hot off the press, that have led a few years later to the approval of a minor in game studies in our department. So this is coming next year, and we're very interested in exploring all the different connections between literature, narrative, performance, and gaming as we think about what a 21st century English and drama department looks like.
So the experience of the seminar has actually really enriched the University of Toronto, Mississauga.
Absolutely, yeah, and has left a really lasting imprint, I think, on the department.
That's fantastic, well done. Okay, so I'm going to turn back to Elizabeth next. I'd like to ask, how did your topic, mediating race and reimagining politics, function in terms of political engagement? Who came out? Who benefited? What would you do differently if you could do it again?
Thank you so much. I think in terms of political engagement, what I found very helpful, especially with the online sessions, were because it turned out to be really a seminar that was held across like the pandemic times. So this was a time when a lot of people like working in filmmaking communities, for example, were having less space, such as film festivals, to have time to talk about their work or showcase their work. So the seminar made it possible for me to curate and invite people to be part of this conversation. So I think in terms of benefit, there was definitely benefit in terms of, for example, we had, I think just for 2020 alone, we had sessions on race and Singapore cinema. There was a session on Thai cinema. And then there were also some sessions that were not like tethered to a particular nation state. And other than objectives in Singapore, I also had a partnership with Toronto Film and Media Seminar. So I would say that generally, and I mean, even in non-pandemic times in sort of certain parts of Southeast Asia, it is like the space for public discourse, for civil discourse, for discussing topics such as race can already be extremely limited. So I think that was also one, I mean, it's really, for me, I see it as like a sort of a core motivation of what I'm doing. Like, so for my research, I find it very necessary that even though I'm conscious that I'm based in Toronto now, that we continue conversations with practitioners and also with academics that are based in Asia. So I think that's also part of this. In a way, logistically speaking, it's just it's just so much harder for me, especially as an early career academic, to be inviting a lot of filmmakers or academics based in Asia to come out to UTM, even if I wanted to, right? I mean, at most I can invite maybe one a year, which I do under another UTM initiative, a UTM filmmaker in residence. So I'm inviting a Thai filmmaker who will come later on this month. So I think the work that I was able to do with this JHI UTM seminar really enabled me to, in a way, I mean, for personally to, in a way, like, I would say maybe improve my profile or like increase my credibility, that even though I had moved to North America, that I wasn't intending to hold myself up in like a certain part of the world, and that I was still very serious about community engagement with communities in Asia. So of course I find it very important to engage with communities in Toronto, but because at that time I just moved over and I was like, all my plans for wanting to engage with community was just sort of like put on standstill. And also because I did the work with JHI UTM in tandem with the work that I was just starting with, the Asian Institute for the Southeast Asia Seminar Series. So I'm continuing that. This is my third year with, and I'm going to continue that for 3 more years. So with like the University of Minnesota, I have a partnership with another early career professor. And so last year we had a series of conversations on censorship across Asian cinema that we named under a Theory, Praxis, Politics series. And just yesterday we had another session on migratory labels. So even though the UTM's like JHI seminar is on mediating race, reimagining geopolitics is over, I feel like, and I'm thinking about what was said, like I feel like the conversations are still continuing, and that is really like maybe in years to come, there would be like different sorts of impact. For me personally, there's definitely like pedagogical impact, being able to have these conversations just as an as someone starting on at UTM, I'm like coming up with syllabi, I'm coming up with courses. So being able to do that while having these conversations was very important to me.
I think that I really enjoyed your point about creating spaces for conversations that would otherwise be really difficult to have, and doing things for your own community and keeping up with your studies at the same time, and sort of making yourself a name in your field at the beginning of your career. I think that's brilliant, and that's one of the ways that the UTM seminar can be beneficial to people who want to try this. I'm going to turn to Martin now. Your project was explicitly designed to bring UTM's classicists into conversation. Did this framing work? And what are the possibilities and rewards of framing a UTM seminar around a specific disciplinary agenda?
It did work very well. I mean, seminars are not just, if you will, intellectual occasions, they're also social and sociological occasions. And it's amazing what can happen if you just get 4 people, 5 people, 10 people, 50 people around a table working on what is dear to them. So that's what happened. In disciplinary terms, we're actually a bit unusual in the sense the UTM Classics unit is small but diverse. So there's me as the literature person among the tenure faculty or permanent faculty, the literature person, 2 historians, and 1 material culture person, and everyone else comes supplements any of these sides. And this may surprise people, but that's exceptional, actually, that historians, archaeologists, and literature people in classics sit on 1 table. In other parts, including at this university, it tends to be much more territorialized. So we were able to now, the JHI seminar and the subsequent seminar are all centered around this integrative notion of classics as a discipline, which has really, really paid off very well. So it continues to work extremely well for us, and we continue to build on our strength. If it would what I think is considerable strength of the unit in and of itself. Looking at the kind of bigger picture, what we effectively did is what I would call the horizontal integration. So you look at the research area with graduate students and whatnot. And my recommendation, again, perhaps also for future iterations of the seminar, and we thought about this as well, is perhaps to integrate also other universities in the GTA. UTM's location, which is something we can do nothing about. We can do a lot about this campus, but we cannot move it closer to downtown. There will always be these 30 kilometers. But it's often perceived to be a liability. It can be seen as an asset. We are closer to McMaster. We are closer to Waterloo. We are closer to Bronx. and so forth. So to make a deliberate attempt, perhaps also to work with colleagues from those institutions. So to push, if you will, the horizontal agenda further. And my second recommendation here, and this actually ties in with things that Ajay was saying, what I would call a vertical integration, namely to integrate more teaching, both graduate and undergraduate teaching. I was delighted to hear really that people are connecting the seminar with perhaps a graduate seminar or an undergraduate seminar. That of course creates fantastic dynamics. It also generates numbers, by the way, but it really is a fantastic opportunity, and it's very typical of UTM, I think, to see research and teaching very much as two sides of very much the same coin. Again, building on the great strengths that we really have, and we have a number of strategic advantages, of which are not always seen as such, and we need to continue to capitalize on those.
I love the idea of horizontal integration. I know that the Jackman Humanities Institute has been pushing interdisciplinary work in many ways for all the years that I've been working there. And this includes bringing in other people from outside the University of Toronto when you have the opportunity. The UTM is beautiful and it has many new and spacious buildings and very good staff support. So I mean, there are fabulous advantages to working right here, including in this space. Okay, I'd like to turn to Ajay. It's clear from your materials about this seminar that there was a lot of public engagement with the South Asian community that was involved during your seminar. How did you engage with the public, and how did this engagement affect the seminar?
Yeah, I would say that one of the ways that these seminars can be very successful is to have a reason for it to be at UTM. So with all my colleagues on this panel, we have the great disciplinary intellectual strengths of UTM, and that makes it makes sense for it to be at UTM. Another reason for something to be at UTM is connecting to the Peel region and our communities in Peel, and so that was very powerful. And I would say it gives a completely different dimension to a humanities set of research initiatives. I would say that in terms of the opportunities, conceptualizing the research with the community partners in mind, rather than having it be just part of outreach, is very powerful. I think also you can have a mix of events, because there might be a concern that this is going to water down, there are amazing organizations, cultural organizations, arts organizations in Peel who offer, and it's very much like what Martin was saying about this reaching out to the region more broadly in terms of universities and beyond the universities. There's tremendous scope. And I think that this is also, it's great to do something that's not already being done. When you have an opportunity like this, I think that what we want is for people in the Peel region to feel like this is their space, this is their university. So I think that can be very powerful. And I think the public facing events help to build a community. So once people have come to one of your events, two of your events, that's both within the university. And another thing is that in terms of community outreach, I would say the university itself has that dimension, because we have to reach out beyond the humanists. We have our core people. In fact, again, just with Martin, I mean, he can speak to this more. The classics in the world, they have done a fabulous job of this for many years, where they have an event, and it's incredible. They have like 100 people come, and they're all high school students. It's really amazing. So, but also in terms of the academic community, there might be many people who are not doing game studies or film or classics, but they're interested and they can come.
Yeah. We have been doing community engaged projects at the Jackman Humanities Institute for the last several years as a way of knowledge exchange, as an opportunity for scholars and researchers to learn from members of the public, as well as for information to travel the other way. It's not some kind of missionary outreach work. It's definitely a two-directional kind of initiative. Okay, the last question I have is for Jacob. My social media is currently overrun with content about AI and ChatGPT, which is making a lot of people a little panicky right now. And I wonder, is it time to reconsider technology, transmedia, and the mixed reality performance landscape? How can a UTM seminar respond to the changing intellectual landscape of technology?
Well, I mean, I think one way to answer that question is to say that we've been panicking since about 2012, or at least observers of not panicking, but thinking about how these technologies force us into sometimes quite productive revisions of our ideas about some pretty received notions about theater. What does it mean to be live? What does it mean to be present? What does it mean to share space? All these kinds of fundamental questions really get reconfigured by these new technologies. And if I think about the topics that were under discussion during our seminar in 1718, they kind of form a prehistory of the topics that would just loom into sudden prominence during the pandemic. So Lindsay Brandon Hunter from the University at Buffalo came and gave a fantastic talk about streaming theater. We didn't realize that streaming theater would become theater in the next couple of years, for the next couple of years. Jen Buckley from the University of Iowa gave a really compelling talk about different audiences and different kinds of audience behavior that could arise when a performance is simultaneously being performed live and also streamed. Again, this is something that has become very much mainstream as a result of the adaptations that we made to the pandemic. Sarah Bae-Jung, who was then at Bowdoin College, now Dean of Fine Arts at York, gave a fantastic talk about digital interfaces in museums and the way that digital technology and interacting with narratives of history via technology actually reshapes history and historiography through performance. So I think all of those topics have not gone away. I think they've actually become more prominent, and these currents that we were interested in at the time as kind of experimental phenomena have become, in the wake of the pandemic, sort of incorporated and naturalized in a lot of thinking about theater performance studies. And so the questions we were engaged with then, I think, are questions we're going to be preoccupied with for years longer. And of course, the whole question of AI, which
It's developing kind of fast.
it's developing kind of fast. But, you know, I mean, I think of the work of the director, Annie Dorson, for example. Theater artists have been incorporating these technologies into the creation of pieces since about 2012. So there's actually a kind of prehistory that can help us think about ChatGPT, I think. Also, just as an aside, ChatGPT is an incredibly conservative playwright and theorist of theater. When it first came out, I asked it a bunch of questions like, how could I write a play? How would it like to write a play? And it gives you just the most kind of realist, sort of like 19th century idea of what a good play is. And then I asked it to complicate its ideas. I said, what happens if I want something more metatheatrical, something self-reflexive? And it cautioned me not to use those techniques and conventions because they can be off-putting. So there's a lot of bias that's built into actually its ideas about drama and theater that we can push on productively.
There's some areas to explore.
That's hope. That's hope. Absolutely.
Guess we can throw it open to general conversation or questions now.
Just wanted to add on to what you were saying. With all this technology, it's interesting that this room right here is remarkably low tech.
Yes.
It's rooms, or huge room and tables and chairs. And I find that really quite fascinating. How much what the impact of low tech.
It's a beautiful space. It can be reconfigured, and absolutely a seminar could use it and take their inspiration for forms and formats from the way that the room can behave. So I will say that it is possible to apply for a second UTM seminar. You just have to wait a year until your seminar has been finished, and then you can do it again if you have the yen.
I have a question for the panel. You all spoke a little bit about community engagement and engaging the community locally. So I'm just wondering if you have any tips for someone starting out, how to get involved with the community and how to bring the community into this kind of academic program.
Well, there is, in the Dean's office, they're working on this, the community, I think there's a catalog that they have of community partnerships at the university. So I think that anybody at the university could access that now and look it up. But yeah, I think it takes a little bit of research to know who are the community organizations and partners.
It takes time to connect. People come to the JHI now with their proposals, but that has been a few years in the making. Word has to get out about what you're doing and what is possible before people will start to approach you.
But maybe just I would encourage people to just wander around Mississauga. Like there's so many things. There's the art gallery of Mississauga. There's, if you think of cultural organizations or humanities, potential humanities partners, there are a lot of places out there.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, did you find yourself connecting overseas, or were these connections that were already in place?
So for the JHI UTM seminar, most of the community partners were overseas. So and more recently in my work with the Asian Institute, the Southeast Asia Seminar Series, I have been in more conversations. We've supported some events by a Real Asian International Film Festival. So, and Real Asian is the, I think, community organization that I've been in conversation with. So I think part of your question was on what I would do differently. So, I mean, not just for this grant, I think if I were to apply for this or any other like grant that requires not requires that on over a certain scale, right? And then I would really, as you say, really think about having the conversations really early on with the community partners. And also, like I said, I think it takes several years. So thankfully in recent times I've been able to just have more conversation and get to know this place.
Yeah.
I mean, the in-person components of the JHI seminar was actually we did workshops at this space, and this is a perfect space, and we had undergraduates and graduate students in attendance. So I think this is a space that people can walk in and feel very comfortable. It's not as intimidating for like some university space maybe can feel like more sterile or sometimes too large, right? And can be intimidating. Whereas I think this is a very non-intimidating space. So I am planning to hold more events and workshops.
Just like to add on to that, when in classics we have lots of experience now with the space, and I completely confirm this is a space that relaxes people. First thing they see often, they want to go to this yellow sofa or whatever. And it actually you can tell the difference actually within 5 to 10 minutes. People will be more open also, for instance, to make mistakes or just to say things that are perhaps not exactly the kind of thing that you want in a good academic environment. So I too found the space enormously enabling.
I'd say too, this is another instance where Ajay's point about spending money really pertains. I mean, you know, if there's an artist, we in the English and drama are often thinking about artists that we want to bring in from the Toronto community and beyond to cultivate relationships that will serve our program and also our students after they leave. And if there's someone who you think would be an interesting interlocutor for students or for the program, bring them in to give a talk, bring them in to give a workshop. I mean, there's a lot of money that comes with this seminar, and particularly for artists, it's a lot of money. So you can bring somebody in, you can pay them, you can establish a relationship that way.
You totally can. Any further advice or thoughts in closing? You're laughing.
I think we've all shared our
We're all shared it.
spent wisdom.
Last thoughts, okay. Thank you to each of you. I really appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this really informative session, and we will be uploading it afterwards onto our YouTube channel. So I'll just get some consent forms and that would be good. But this was lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you to those of you on Zoom. So we're just going to end the session at this time.